chose to invite you at this time so as to not having to call you out on the weekend. So I'm very pleased that you're here. As you would have been made aware, on Tuesday evening I traveled to St. Lucia to take part in one of our regular CARICOM Heads of Government meeting. The meeting took place, the opening ceremony and other developments took place on Wednesday, and we met all through Thursday. And as I speak to you now, the meeting is being wrapped up. Usually a communique is issued, and there will be one issued in the next few hours. Foreign Minister Moses is there, and he would take part in the text review of the communique, but I came back a little earlier so as to be able to continue some work that I have to attend to here. Ladies and gentlemen, the main issues that we had on the agenda going into the meeting are the ones that you would have been familiar with at the last meeting, because one meeting feeds the agenda of the next meeting. And you may recall that at the last meeting of the heads, the issue that Trinidad and Tobago had pursued quite vigorously since 2015 is the issue of the CSME, CARICOM Single Market and Economy. That is an agenda item which had been removed from the agenda of CARICOM, but was placed back there in 2015 at my first meeting as leader of Trinidad and Tobago's delegation in Guyana. We had done that because the market of CARICOM is so important to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It's our largest market for manufactured goods. It's our best market in supporting jobs in Trinidad and Tobago and our earnings from the export of those goods. So we have a vested interest in ensuring that we have access to the markets of all of these larger and smaller Caribbean Commonwealth territories, CARICOM territories. So the CSME has a whole package of benefits for us as a country and us as a region. So once it came back on the agenda, what we were finding was that the same thing was happening again, that at every meeting, this agenda item of the CSME comes up and it's discussed or mentioned for half an hour, 20 minutes. We speak about what a wonderful thing it should be, and it's an assignment for the regional leadership, but we never had the time to discuss it in details and more. Countries were not being made to commit to the bringing into being of the CSME because there are certain things to happen, not all of it smooth, and in some instances not all of it very pleasant, but the outcome of a CSME would bring benefits and dividends for all of us. So again, at the behest of Trinidad and Tobago, to avoid this frequent mention and adjournment with no action, we requested of our CARICOM colleagues in Jamaica that we have a special meeting where the single item on the agenda would be the CSME. We got agreement for that, and that meeting took place here in Trinidad, and out of it came the St. Anne's Declaration, where I wouldn't say miraculously, but I would say satisfyingly, all the territories agreed that the time has come, or in fact the time has long passed, for us to have taken this decision, and we are now going to make that leap. And the details of that would have been familiar to you because many of you who are here this evening would have covered that meeting and the press conference and so on. So we did take the step to commit to begin to roll out the operations of a Caribbean single market and economy. And there were a number of subordinate actions which should have fallen from that. The most interesting one was the item, the last item of that meeting at St. Anne's at the Hilton. And that was, now that we have agreed, because as you know, CARICOM decisions are made in unanimity, meaning every single country has to agree. If one country disagrees, the decision cannot stand. So whatever the issue, you have to get the agreement of every single country. So on that day at the Hilton, when we did get every single country to agree to go forward with the CSME, that was in fact a major development. Because if one country had said no, the CSME would have remained where it was, on the table, on the agenda. We couldn't go forward. But having got that agreement in unanimity, that night at the Hilton, we were confronted with the clauses of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which is the clause that brought and under which the CARICOM operates, and that is the Treaty of Chaguaramas. There's a clause in that treaty that says that if a CSME is brought into operation, there shall be a development fund, a CARICOM development fund. That fund originated in that way, in that clause, out of an understanding that what we call the LDCs, the smaller Caribbean territories, whose market would now be pretty much captive to the MDCs, the bigger CARICOM countries, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago. Our producing economy, where the manufactured goods are produced, by bringing the CSME into play, we are pretty much in control of the markets of these small territories who have nothing really to offer our market. To deal with that lopsided situation, the Treaty of Chaguaramas makes provision for this fund into which the MDCs, meaning Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados, will make a payment so that that fund will operate and be accessed by the smaller territories. Well, we agreed to do that because, in any case, once we agree to go forward with the CSME, by treaty obligation, we are obliged to do that. On this occasion, we had some vigorous discussions as to how much should be paid and when. And I could tell you that the discussions were quite vigorous because virtually all our Caribbean territories, all our Commonwealth territories, all our CARICOM countries have a case that can be made that we are under some financial pressure. But even so, the demand of the treaty supersedes that consideration. I can tell you that Trinidad and Tobago has made a payment of $5 million US into that fund, so we were not in any default. What we were in at the time when we discussed it in St. Anne's here, we made a representation and did get acceptance from our colleagues in CARICOM that rather than make a full payment, because I think our liability is about $40 million. Trinidad and Tobago's liability to the fund is $40 million, but we agreed to pay it over time in elements of smaller components, and we have begun to do that. Some other countries have not been as forthcoming, and that was the subject of some vigorous discussion in St. Lucia, because the smaller territories were very adamant. In fact, even here in Trinidad and Tobago, it was pretty much a condition for agreeing to allow the CSME to go forward. But through the negotiations that took place here in Trinidad and through our mutual understanding of the benefits to come from the CSME, that we go forward. And we have agreed that territories will make the payments as they're able to, with goodwill prevailing. So other than that, Trinidad and Tobago, on this occasion, one of the directions of the CSME is to work our region as one region, again, with benefits to be had. For example, we are working towards having a single ICT space in the region. So you don't have ICT for Grenada's against Trinidad and Tobago against Barbados. We have one ICT space where the CARICOM operates that for the benefits to be had from doing that. We also very early observed that transportation, if we have one regulatory arrangement for transportation, allowing all of us to have access to each other's airspaces and so on, and business development in transportation, So we need to move towards that. What it meant was that all these laws that each country had separately had to be codified in one arrangement. So the Mutual Air Services Agreement, which was the subject of work in all the AG's offices across the CARICOM, a single agreement was hammered out, and that air services agreement, was signed at the last meeting. And as you know how it operates, having signed it here in Trinidad, and I think you did cover that here at the time, it was ratified today and handed to the CARICOM Secretariat. So Trinidad and Tobago has now fulfilled its obligations with respect to the Mutual Air Services Agreement. And it gives us the opportunity for our airline to operate in a more efficient, and if they choose to, the business of air services can now be better administered in one territory because we are covered by this Mutual Air Services Agreement. So that was done. We have one other item which we were close to signing, but our Attorney General's office has a little bit of work to do on it, which is the matter for the mutual arrest treaty, a treaty under which any citizen of CARICOM could be arrested in another territory for offenses committed in another territory. So it allows law enforcement to be more efficient, and given what we are facing in the movement and the strength of the criminal element across the region, that is a matter of great importance, which we intend to ratify in the very near future. As you know, Trinidad and Tobago has lead responsibility for security in the quasi-cabinet of the CARICOM, and at the heads meeting, we usually take responsibility for dealing with the issues. And we've done a lot of work in the intervening period, and some comprehensive reports have gone to the heads. One of the main things that we have been grappling with is the requirement to provide better funding for the regional institutions, because we do have some regional institutions which are contributing to our overall security at the national level and at the regional level, but invariably those institutions have funding difficulties because territories, for one reason or the other, do not pay up or do not pay up on time. And we've come to the conclusion that that is no way to run the regional security. So after very many meetings and very many heated discussions, we had come to the conclusion at an earlier time that what we should consider is that the territories add a small $2 or $3 charge on airline tickets, specifically for funding security issues in the region, those security issues for which territories are required to make this payment. So if we are having difficulty making the payment now out of our exchequer account, if we have funds raised in that way, that small charge on tourist, I think it also applies to the cruise ship tickets as well. That will provide funds that will provide the security that the very tourists themselves would need if they are to continue using the region without fear of the region not being sufficiently secure in today's world where all kinds of things could happen. There are a number of security elements that are having to be operated in the region now: electronic, physical, policing, information sharing, training. All of these things are required to be done if we are to be comfortable that our security arrangements are sufficient to respond to what we are being asked to respond to. But a few countries have been resisting this, even as they were having difficulty making the payments, and they were making the case for improved security. And in the end, at the last meeting, which is not today's meeting, the one before, in dealing with the intransigence and in dealing with the fact that you have to have unanimity to make a decision, and understanding that we had to go forward on this matter of funding our security, we took a decision that countries should be allowed to make that decision at the national level and go forward with it and not be hindered by other countries that do not want to do it for whatever reason. And at this meeting, the reports that came from the regional bodies, the impacts and conslay, that decision was represented and has been reaffirmed. So it is now up to us here in Trinidad and Tobago to make that part of our collection if we choose to, and that will be a matter for the cabinet. And most countries, Barbados has indicated that they will do it, and some of the other countries, Jamaica has decided that they will not do it. But of course, they've also said that they will remain in and contribute to the funding of the regional institutions. So those who think that that will help them to make their payments are now authorized to go forward on your own and do it. Those who think that they can pay it without recourse to this particular mechanism, we will just expect them to pay. And, but you know, this is a perennial issue amongst us in the region, whether it is UWI. Thank God we don't have to pay for West Indies cricket, we have to refund. But, you know, this is something that is, it creates difficulties, because if the payments are not made, then the institution, sometimes even the staff. In fact, in recent months, we had a situation where the impact staff was not being paid, even though they were at work, providing security for the region. And so we just can't operate like that. So it will be for the cabinet in Trinidad and Tobago to decide. And bear in mind, that charge, initially it was supposed to be a $5 charge. Then they said no, some people were saying no, that was too much on the tourists, because it is the tourists that is paying that charge and not Trinidad and Tobago people or the people of the territory. It's a charge on the users of the region. And then it came down to $3, then to $2, and we still couldn't get agreement. So obviously, some people were opposed to the principle. There are those who believe that such a small charge would not, in fact, deter tourists from coming to our region, because some of them actually consume more than that in their demands on the region. So that's where we are on those matters, and the other standard matters, and the communique later today or tonight will give you some more detail on other matters. But most importantly, at this meeting of CARICOM, we had on the agenda, as you would expect, the matters which had attracted our attention in recent times outside of the meetings of the heads. And I speak specifically about the Venezuelan situation. We, as you know, have had to respond and have been responding to the deterioration of the situation in Venezuela. It was economic deterioration which manifested itself in political deterioration. At the onset of the political deterioration in Venezuela, CARICOM as a body had discussed the matter and had made calls to the Venezuelan authorities on both sides of the divide in Venezuela to be careful with how they proceed, and of course, if they need third-party assistance, to come together to hammer out some course of action which could prevent them from going into difficulty, or greater difficulty, that CARICOM was willing to be a facilitator of those. That was never taken up, but we were all aware that things were deteriorating in Venezuela. And as you know, we here in Trinidad and Tobago began to see the expressions of persons, economic migrants coming to our shores, returning to Venezuela, and some remaining here in Trinidad and Tobago until it became an issue which we had to deal with. But in terms of how the Venezuelan situation developed, it very rapidly attracted the attention of others, and Venezuela became subject to sanctions by the United States, which pretty much smothered its economic activity and, in fact, would have resulted in some significant further deterioration of their condition. At that time, expressions of intervention in Venezuela were quite clear. We had a period in February, I think it was, when activity towards treating with the Venezuelan situation in a decisive way came from a group called the Lima Group, which involved South American countries except Uruguay, and Central American countries except Nicaragua and Mexico, and some Caribbean countries. This Lima Group assigned itself the responsibility to remove the government of Venezuela and to replace it with a government of their choice. That created some significant political economic, and I dare say geopolitical developments, Trinidad and Tobago's position was that we subscribe to and we maintain our position of non-interference, non-intervention in the affairs of neighboring and other states. And on that basis, the CARICOM position, which was very much Trinidad and Tobago's position, identical position, we got unanimity at CARICOM for that principle. And against that background, we immediately took steps to refer our concerns to the United Nations. And you may have recalled that a small delegation of CARICOM leaders, myself included, along with the chairman of CARICOM at the time, Prime Minister of St. Kitts Nevis, Dr. Timothy Harris, and the Prime Minister of Barbados, the three of us who detailed to pursue the diplomatic initiatives of CARICOM at the United Nations and elsewhere with respect to what is to happen with the Venezuelan situation. We have a position, we had a position. And the position from day one was that any third party in this matter should be facilitating the Venezuelans to deal with the Venezuelan situation, because we could not see any peaceful way to remove the Venezuelan government by regime change initiatives, which was being advocated by the Lima Group. Trinidad and Tobago was not a member of the Lima Group. There were 4 CARICOM territories that were, and they, of course, went along with the Lima Group positions until it came to the edge of military intervention in Venezuela. Those members of the CARICOM who were part of it were also members of the CARICOM decision of non-intervention and non-interference, because that was a unanimous position at CARICOM. However, the European countries under the European Union, they had in fact given a deadline for the Venezuelan president to leave office. I think he was given 8 days to leave office. CARICOM never subscribed to that kind of deadline arrangement, because we said that that would not bring about a solution. It was not going to work, and we were not going to be a part of it. Along with Uruguay and Mexico, we met in Montevideo, and the Europeans came, because by that time the Europeans created something called a contact group. Having seen that the deadline was not workable, they created a contact group, and they immediately contacted what we call the Uruguay group, the Montevideo Accord, where CARICOM, Mexico, and Uruguay insisted that the way forward with this Venezuelan problem is through dialogue between the parties. And I could tell you that all along, at various levels, our diplomatic initiative in Trinidad and Tobago, in Barbados, with the Canadian assistance, and sometimes the Canadians' initiative, we have all been meeting and talking to both sides in Venezuela, the government and the opposition. Mr. Guaido and his team, President Maduro and his team. CARICOM has been in contact with, and then Canada took some initiative, arranged a meeting in Barbados, and both sides took part in that meeting. And then, of course, the Norwegians initiated a facilitatory role and invited the parties to Norway to do exactly what CARICOM had advocated from day one, which is to try and create a pathway through dialogue to discuss them. I can tell you, at this meeting, we were honored to have with us in St. Lucia the Prime Minister of Norway, Prime Minister Erna Solberg. She spent a very long time with us, allowing us to meet with her on more than one occasion. We were also visited by the United Nations Secretary General, who spent a fair amount of time with us. We met with them in sessions, both at the level of all the heads. We met with them, the Prime Minister of Norway, the 3 Prime Ministers responsible for the Venezuela initiative. We met with the Prime Minister of Norway, and of course, Trinidad and Tobago in a one-on-one bilateral met with the Prime Minister of Norway. All of it dealing with matters largely of the Venezuelan situation, and also the effect of climate change on our small island states, an issue which Norway is in the forefront of dealing with, where they are having some significant influence on how the international funding arrangements are being collated and appropriated to countries who are in line to be supported by the decisions made at the COP meetings and so on. So we had some very extensive and fruitful discussions with the Secretary General of the United Nations and, of course, the Prime Minister of Norway and her team. And suffice it to say, though, that we in the CARICOM, we are pleased that the position that we have taken in the beginning appears now to be the position of most parties, because the call against military intervention or the use of threats to force regime change has now been joined by virtually everyone except a small number of countries who might have other ideas. But the general sentiment from the Europeans, from the South Americans, and in the Caribbean, and as far as Africa, the sentiment is that there is little support for military intervention in Venezuela. And of course, contrary to what we were being told here in Trinidad and Tobago by some of our parliamentary colleagues, I just want to draw to your attention that the government of Venezuela has understood and as exists legally at the United Nations is the government that exists in Venezuela today. So those who thought that we were supporting a particular individual and should have done otherwise and should have supported other presidents, I just want them to take note of the fact that the guest at CARICOM this week was the Secretary General of the United Nations, he who leads that organization, where Venezuela is understood to be represented by the Maduro government. And until that changes, we in Trinidad and Tobago subscribe to the rule of law and we subscribe to the principles I've just outlined. We also had a visit from the single United States Congresswoman, the only person in the Congress in the United States who represents, whose entire district is in the Caribbean, Congresswoman Stacey Pasquet. She came and visited us, and the last meeting I attended before I traveled home this evening was a meeting with her. I met with her on a one-on-one last night. We had a meeting that went from 7:30 to 11 o'clock. And this is a Caribbean person. She represents the United States territories in the region, not Puerto Rico. She represents the Virgin Islands. She's the only person in the Congress who has the Caribbean as her district. And she gave us of her time. She's on a number of committees in the United States. You guys know they have a huge committee system within their administration. She's on a number of committees, and many of those committees cover the areas of interest where the Caribbean has need to be known and to have some element of advocacy. Today she met with the full CARICOM heads, and she brought to us a number of issues which she expects that the Congress will be working on. And we also took to her our position and our issues which we expected. That was a singular item of satisfaction for us, because one of the things that is likely to happen out of that visit is that the relevant committees that we are now exposed to through elements of the Congress who will work on our behalf, taking these issues to the Congress. One of the things that we expect is that there would be some element of hearings in the United States Parliament, Congress, where the facts of our situation would be dealt with and not situations being fed to people by persons either who are not sympathetic to our cause, who do not have the accurate information and are victims of misinformation, or who are just downright malicious. We are very pleased to have been told that it is quite likely that we would get our issues addressed by way of the hearings process. And the other issue which in that process, which is comforting to us, is that this whole issue of de-risking and deregulation of our banks we need the American banking system to be told from us how banking operates in the Caribbean and why we should not be blacklisted or delisted. Because you see, there is a default position being attached to the Caribbean Commonwealth banking that even people who don't even know us, who don't know what we're doing, just speak about us and take action against us because somebody say that is what is happening in the Caribbean. The banking in the Caribbean is a facilitator of fraud and corruption and money laundering and drug running. And you would be amazed how some people think that is what we do here in the Caribbean. And as a result of that, we need to be brought to heel to prevent that kind of behavior from being part of the international business community. And some people, having been made to pay significant fines for running afoul of the regulations that are being made, are now prepared to take the position that we don't want to risk doing business with the Caribbean banks because the risks are not worthy of the kinds of penalties that could attend the banks if they run afoul of these laws. And worse, at the European side, they are making regulations that are basically now at the point where they are taking positions against us which are anti-competitive positions. Those positions, thank you, it goes beyond trying to rectify wrongdoings on the part of the banking community. It's reaching the point now where one could see clearly that if they are allowed to go along that line or to get away with that kind of unilateral treatment of us, that basically what it is shutting us out of lucrative business, much of it contributing currently to the economy of many parts of the Caribbean who are engaged in banking. And we too in Trinidad and Tobago, we are engaged in banking in a big way, but there are some territories for which the banking industry is their major industry and only industry. So you understand the level of threat that is. So we need to address these issues. We've been doing so. We've appointed an ambassador who toured Europe, went to the various fora, made our case. We still have to fight it because it has not gone away. So we are now going to be redoubling our effort in our face-to-face, and hopefully as we meet the United States personnel who are now learning of our circumstance and learning about what has been happening to us, we need to become more aggressive, and in that we expect that as we defend ourselves diplomatically, that we will relieve ourselves of some of this undue pressure that we are under here in the CARICOM. And while I'm on that score, I should tell you, now is a good time to tell you that I propose in September to make my first visit to the United Nations General Assembly. Since I became Prime Minister, this General Assembly meets every year, but I have not been there. But this year, I think it's opportune, given where we are at and what the subjects are around us, that it would be useful for Trinidad and Tobago to attend through my office and for us to make our position known to the international community. We are not going to leave it. Right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we are having difficulty convincing our own people. Some of you in the media, even after we register Venezuelans and tell you we register 15,000, you just refuse to accept that. You keep talking about 40,000 and 60,000 and 80,000. And those figures have an implication. And as we in Trinidad and Tobago, we have people amongst us, walking amongst us, working amongst us, sleeping amongst us. We don't have refugee camps in Trinidad and Tobago. We don't have refugees. We have economic migrants. Some of you are still talking about refugees. And there are significant implications for that difference of phrase, that turn of phrase is important. And there are persons who, in the case of Barbados, international agencies who have made direct threats and taken action against Barbados for having not agreed to do certain things. Those are the kinds of things that we face on a daily basis at the level of the Prime Minister's office in our territories. And the time has come for us not to rely on others to speak for us, we need to speak for ourselves at the appropriate fora. And starting, well, Trinidad and Tobago joins that because other territories have been going and we've been represented there by our foreign minister every year. We have a very strong mission in Washington. We have a very strong mission in New York. And in September, I probably will be away for a few days because I will be in New York for the General Assembly. That goes on for a week. But before that, I also proposed to go to Washington, where I would meet with a number of people in the United States system, where Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM business is part of their remit. So you'll be advised later on when the plans are formed up, but that is in the cards. So I would say we've had a very successful meeting. We've made some significant breakthroughs, and Trinidad and Tobago in CARICOM and CARICOM alongside Norway on this Venezuelan matter, and Norway acting as a facilitator, and all of us opening our doors and making our best offices available for the Venezuelans to treat with their problems. Where we're at right now is that hopefully in the not too distant future, the parties will agree on some kind of agenda for discussions. It might involve a number of meetings, another meeting, another meeting, another meeting. Hopefully it will not be over a long period of time like the Vietnam War or the Middle Eastern situation, but this kind of situation has a way of requiring tending and patience. And I think that is where that situation is now. And our presence 7 miles from Venezuela, our presence in the CARICOM as part of CARICOM's leadership, especially on this matter, and our presence at the fora of the United Nations, at the IDB, and elsewhere. Trinidad and Tobago is busy, having been called to duty in these matters. So that's where it's at, and I want to thank you all for covering the facts. All I could ask of you is to be your normal, responsible self, and you'll find it very rewarding to read the documents all, because all the documents will be on the CARICOM website, and they make very edifying reading. You may, after you read them, you may have questions at the office of the Prime Minister or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You'll be only too happy to give you further explanations, clarifications, or answer any queries you may have. But we just feel that there's a lot to be had once our media is well informed as to what we are involved in and why, what the future holds for us. It serves nobody's purpose to publish information that is irresponsibly inaccurate, or worse, to be the mouthpiece for other people's hidden or not so well hidden agendas. If you have any questions, I would attempt to answer them for you now. Yes, Joe?
Jules Brown, TV6 News. Prime Minister, could you give us any details other than what had been reported thus far on the situation with the Jamaican delegation and the issue over the funding arrangements for the Caribbean Development Fund?
I think I just did.
There was talk of a walkout and so on.
Well, one Prime Minister took a deep breath, but the meeting continued, and we concluded our caucus with everyone present. There was a very strong difference of opinion between Jamaica and some of the smaller territories, but it was, it was resolved, and nothing unusual happened except that, when you go to these meetings, you represent your country, and if the country has a position and the leadership of the country feels strongly enough about that position, you are required to defend that position. And I'm sure that whatever is reported, what cannot be said is that the Jamaican Prime Minister did not defend his country's position. That could not be said. And of course, his colleagues did defend their positions as well. Trinidad and Tobago doesn't usually find itself in a referee position, but I played a lot of games. I played a lot of sports, so I know the role of a referee. So at the end of it, everything is fine.
Is this one of those situations, if you could help people understand a little better, because there's always been this issue of how much Trinidad and Tobago has been contributing towards the issue of CARICOM financially, while still having to deal with its own economy, its own challenges?
Well, that's what I was saying earlier on. All of us have economic challenges, every single CARICOM territory, whether it's Jamaica, Barbados, under IMF programs, St. Kitts, Nevis, we all have that, so that is a given. But that does not mean that our aspirations for working together should die because of an inability to pay for the institutions that will give us a better chance going forward. We have that as a given. The treaty says what is required of us. And what the treaty doesn't allow is for persons to determine when they would comply and which clause in the treaty they will comply with. But all of us, and that's why Trinidad and Tobago made a part payment, as I just told you. But we are a major beneficiary. And if we think we have economic difficulty now, let us lose our CARICOM markets. And then you will know difficulty. Because the first thing that's going to happen to us is that what we produce from our factories, we cannot dispose of. And those persons who work in those factories wouldn't have jobs. As simple as that. So where we are required to make our contribution, it is not that we are paying too much or we are paying others in a time when we ourselves can use some help. We are maintaining something that is vital to our existence, difficult as it might be now.
Good evening, Peter Christopher from Guardian Media. Just going back to the suggestion that there should be a fee attached to airlines and cruise ships. I just wanted to get an idea of what type of funding are we trying to raise. Like, for instance, a institution like Impacts, what is the annual fee required to be raised for that institution?
Minister, can you remember Impacts figure? It's not large, but it's, yeah, our contribution, I'm told, is about 10 million TT. And of course, you know what Impacts provides us with a certain amount of service. These are charges for the operation of the country's interests. We are awaiting a budget from Impacts with respect to the other things that are required to be funded. And based on that, which we'll get, we agreed at the level of the heads that we won't wait until the next meeting, because these meetings take place every 6 months. But we will meet electronically, video conferencing in the next couple of months or so, by which time we should get a budget, and by which time we should have taken a decision as to what the countries are going to do for that particular charge. The fee, whether it's going to be $2 or $3, we'll have to decide that. But we really need to go forward and to pay our cost for those institutions. Other proposals were put, some didn't find favor. For example, one of the proposals that came forward from those who did the analyses for the heads meeting was one of the options available to us to treat with the regional problem was to have some kind of a regional police force. Well, Trinidad and Tobago could not countenance that because we believed that was unworkable, and we disagreed. And of course, as you know, if one country disagreed, it doesn't go forward. And of course, others didn't agree either. So that was one option that went off the table. Another option was to determine our liability as a percentage of our GDP. We refused to accept that as well because we didn't want to find ourselves with we intend to grow our GDP, and we didn't want our charges to grow as our GDP grows going forward. So we will look at the specific figures, and as you know, what happens is that liabilities for the event or the issue is apportioned to the country, with Jamaica being the largest territory, it usually pays the largest amount. Then come Trinidad and Tobago, then come Barbados, and then everybody pays according to I think the population size, the size of the economy. So it's a graded system. So the very small territories pay the smallest amount. The very large economies pay the largest amount, which is only reasonable.
Well, I could imagine that if a fee comes into effect, it could have some effect on our
what tourism. Fee? You mean the charge?
Yes.
Remember, that charge is not being paid by regional nationals, to be paid by the incoming tourists on their tickets. So it doesn't matter how many people you have in the territory. It's being levied on persons who come into our territory as tourists.
Well, I was getting at that. It might have an effect on the tourism market. Would it have any significant negative impact?
Well, some persons have that view, but others have the view that a $2 charge on a ticket will not prevent persons who choose the Caribbean as their destination to not come to the Caribbean. If somebody says, I'm not going because of a $2 charge on a ticket, they wasn't coming at all. And those who, for example, Barbados, which is a major tourist destination, they have indicated that they will do it because it is more important to worry about failure in the security side and the effect that would have on tourism than to worry about a few tourists who may not come because of a $2 charge. We have been fortunate so far that nothing has happened in this cruel world, nothing terrorism-wise or similar, that could have the effect of chasing tourists out of our region. Let's knock wood on that. But we have to preserve that by being proactive with respect to security. In today's world, I don't want to go into any details now, but one of the problems that we're facing now is the dispersal of persons who may be under instructions to take action against people and territories and assets as against what was happening 5 years ago when it was concentrated in a particular area. We are not without risks in this area. We are one of the major areas of tourist travel. And in our presence are the assets of people who might be targets. So let us not fail to secure ourselves by not supporting for example, the information flow between us, the developed countries that have larger resource bases and so on, about persons who come in the region, who might be in the region, and who may want to harm us. We need to know that. So we have to have mechanisms for identifying, exchanging information, and I dare say, responding to what we are dealing with. So that kind of response, there's also the need in our discussion, and that has been accepted, the need for a rapid response mechanism. Meaning, if one territory finds itself in a situation requiring help, then all the other territories would have had within themselves the understanding that if any of the territories end up in a situation needing help, that rapid response help must be available. We owe it to our citizens to have to be in that position.
Okay, also on the topic of tourism, but out of local news, recently we saw that there was some controversy coming out of Trinidad Tourism Company where the chairman fired the CEO. Are you at least a bit concerned of what is unfolding within Trinidad tourism at this time?
I am aware that certain things are happening there. I don't have all the details. There's a minister responsible for that, and I'm not the minister responsible for that, but I'm head of the cabinet. One of the things I do know is that we have to take ownership of whatever is happening there now. And that's what's going to happen. We sought to reorganize that area of government. We had shut down the tourist, what was it called before? Tourism Development Company. We used to have the tourist board, then we had the tourism development company, now we have Tourism TT. And Tobago, I think we are expecting that those decisions would be a little more contributory. I don't think we're there yet, but whatever is happening there, we'll deal with. I don't have all the details, so I couldn't assist you any further than that, except to say that the government must take ownership of whatever is happening there, and we will find out what's happening. But it's not the first time somebody has been fired. It's not the first time a board has had issues. But these are administrative matters, and we will ensure that they're properly guided.
Yeah, greetings, Prime Minister. The Venezuelan migrant exercise that TNT did you get any sort of reaction and response from colleagues in CARICOM, such as if it could be a template for them, or whether they would also recognize registration cards, or anything like that at all?
Yes, we got admiration for the effective way that we have dealt with the issue. And some people have already, I think St. Lucia in particular, had already put Venezuelans on visa, and other territories that are in that situation, they probably would, if they find themselves in our situation, they have a template to follow. The persons who commented on what we have done have all been favorable, both within and from outside the region. So we think we have done reasonably well with respect to a very trying situation. And our country is viewed as one that did the best that it could in a situation where we had to take decisions, in fact, some of the territories who spoke up on this particular issue were making the case that as we are pressured by others, we are having persons from the outside coming to our area for the relief that our own citizens don't think that, that we have here. The fact that people are coming to us for relief from their zone should tell our people that, we are not, what we sometimes paint ourselves to be. But we have to handle it, and Trinidad and Tobago's handling of it, in talking to the Norwegians, and talking to the Secretary General of the UN, and talking to the American congressperson. As a matter of fact, the issue that came in front of us as a new issue was the issue in Haiti. We were confronted with a petition, actually. CARICOM received a petition signed by 3 pages of American congressmen and women who have called on CARICOM to intervene in the Haitian situation, and CARICOM took a decision to send a ministerial delegation to Haiti, a fact-finding ministerial delegation led by Jamaica and Bahamas and one other territory, to receive firsthand facts surrounding developments in Haiti. So we have Venezuela down here in the Southern Caribbean, and we have Haiti in the Northern Caribbean, all of which are attracting the attention of CARICOM and our external partners.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. You said that global warming was on the agenda. What I'd like to know is the Secretary General of the United Nations said that you're committed to helping fight to keep global emissions at no more than 1.5%. What clear resolutions did the CARICOM governments agree on to combat climate change?
We didn't get into the numbers. I think the whole question of climate change, whether it's through global warming or global cooling, I think the general sentiment accepted by the territories is that we are experiencing some effects of climate change, and we chose not to spend time focusing on what is causing it, but it's affecting us. But one also needs to know what the causes might be. And the response to that at the level of the UN and the Norwegian effort, where they are specialized in advancing this, because they too have been observing severe weather, which they attribute to climate change, that all the territories who spoke up on the issue indicated a willingness to take action in moving towards a reduction in fossil fuel usage. In fact, one territory indicated that by 2030, their ambition is to become completely fossil fuel free. And others have given certain targets. Trinidad and Tobago, our target I think is 10% by 2025. By 2025, we should be getting our power, 10% of it from renewable sources. To do that, as you know, we are out now. We're just closing off our request for proposals. We have these proposals in hand now. They're being evaluated, and any minute now, that could come to the cabinet for sign-off. And those who are going to get involved in renewables will begin that process in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm pleased to say that among those who have indicated an interest are the big oil companies in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know what they have put up in the proposals, but they are in the basket of proposals, and hopefully if they do get involved with their resource base, we should very quickly. And we are also having discussions at the Ministry of Public Utilities to bring to the Cabinet a policy of energy, conservation of energy, because we here in Trinidad and Tobago, we really do consume energy recklessly. We are among the highest per capita user of electricity. Much of it subsidized, I should say all of it subsidized. And we are not at the technological advance that is available using LED as against incandescent lighting. And we are also not auditing our usage of electricity as we should. That is going to have to change if we are going to reduce our consumption to a level that is responsive to what you've just raised, and also to try to access more power from sources other than using our own gas, which we can market separately. So there are a lot of pluses to be had from that.
The Secretary General also mentioned that he's advocating for a different approach to infrastructure in terms of development and building to ensure that a crisis like what took place in 2017 with the Hurricane Erna that affected Dominica, to ensure that that would never take place again. Is Trinidad and Tobago also affected by that? Are we taking concrete steps to adjust our approach to?
Well, we don't have a specific national campaign, but our construction here in Trinidad and Tobago, domestic construction, there's room for some improvement, but they are engineering type, and a lot of it is not major. The quality of our housing here, the materials we use, much of it already is beyond some of the standards that have been set. And we do have, like our commercial buildings, our public buildings are already being constructed in a certain way that meets certain standards, but there's still some room for improvement. Even though we don't have a national building code, we usually build our substantial buildings against the California code. So we are covered in that way, but that does not mean that we should not. This never-ending story of a national building code, we should really try to move towards that. But our chronic attitude of not enforcing laws and regulations in Trinidad and Tobago, having a building code and not enforcing it, is like not having it. Because these things are only useful if they are enforced. And they only contribute in environments where there's enforcement. So that might be the reason why a building code has never really been implemented here, because maybe some people feel that what's the point in having it? We're never going to enforce it. So, but that's one way of looking at it, but that's not the final story. That came up today in our discussion with the US Congresswoman, because Dominica, the rebuilding in Dominica, and those who are assisting us, the question now is sustainability, that we build things that can sustain themselves when challenged by the environment. So that is now the new buzzword, sustainability. And that is causing us, all of us, especially those who are exposed to hurricanes and earthquakes and so on, to think about sustainability in the engineering, design, construction, and utilization. So we are there in the discussion. Some territories are there in the construction, and the funding agencies and the donors are there demanding that sustainability is to be part of our reconstruction program.
The reason I raise this as well is because when there's crises in the smaller islands, Trinidad and Tobago has to usually step in. So
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last.
When there's crises, disaster strikes, whether it be a hurricane or whatnot, in some of the smaller territories, Trinidad and Tobago usually has to step in.
Well, we will
sometimes
all,
in a disproportionate.
and that's why we all have an interest in sustainability. We are happy to hear that in Dominica the rebuilding is being done with sustainability in line, because another hurricane and they are flattened again. Whenever that happens, we will be required to get involved wherever it is. The last big one was in St. Martin, it was in Dominica, it was in Antigua, Barbuda. We did step in at some cost to ourselves. We were among the first to have got to Barbuda with a helicopter. And we operated it for days up there. And of course, our national population did contribute. So if we are able to improve our response, we ourselves here in Trinidad and Tobago, we suffered a 6.9 magnitude earthquake. We came out of it without any significant damage and no loss of life. That is an indication that our structures are not as flimsy as some might think. We do have fairly good structures in Trinidad and Tobago because a magnitude 6.9 earthquake is not to be sneezed at. But our major buildings, not many of them suffered any damage at all. But we always need to be cognizant of that and to keep working on it. We're building a hospital tower in Port of Spain now. It most certainly is going to be built to the California code. We're building, all our schools have been built to those codes. And so far, we've been tested. And fortunately, we've come out of it without major damage or major collapse and so on. In some areas where the engineering is different, a magnitude 6 earthquake could wipe out the city because their buildings are different. So while we are not entirely exposed, we carry some element of exposure because natural hazards of the kind of powerful hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, those are natural hazards that could attend us at any time, and we would be called upon to respond. But the time to respond is not when it's happening. The time to build a fire brigade is not when the fire has started. It's long before. And so we have done some of that, but we have to keep on doing it.
Just two quick things, Prime Minister. One, the issue of the banks. The government has been talking about a turnaround of the economy and so on, but you painted a very serious picture concerning the issue with the banking sector within the region, Trinidad and Tobago included. Does that pose a risk to the issue of the turnaround that you've been speaking of?
When you say turnaround, what do you mean?
Economic turnaround. The government has
been our economy?
Yes, sir.
Our banking sector is among the strongest part of our economy. What we face is a risk that others are seeking to attach to us. And we have been working on that consistently. We've crossed a number of the hurdles, and I dare say we are close to coming to the end of the prescriptions that they've given us. What we are finding is that they keep moving the goalposts. And of course, we as small territories, we have no seat at the table when the rules are being made. And some of our CARICOM colleagues have already been de-risked. Belize is having great difficulty with its banking sector, and others. Present at the meeting today were the Cayman Islands, who have just come out of a great scare because they were listed, Cayman Islands, British territory, and they were listed as one of the culprits. Turks and Caicos, they have also, so they've just dodged a bullet because their entire economy is dependent on bank accounts coming in and out. So the region faced the risk. Not all of us have been acted upon. There's a tier 1 and tier 2. As a matter of fact, the conversation has gone to the point now where some leaders are saying that we are refusing to refer to ourselves as blacklisting. It's not whitelisting, it's blacklisting. But in fact, it's not listing, it is a question, it's an appendix that they put on a document and put our name on it. They put an appendix on the document saying that these countries are doing so and so and so and so. Where is the evidence? And we are taking the position that we are going to be challenging and calling for the evidence. When we appear before, when our spokespersons, whoever they might be, appear before the United States Congress, one of the things that we're going to be asking for is that those who make allegations against us to hurt us and to hurt our economy, where is the evidence? Because these allegations, these actions, these demands that you're making of us should be evidence-based. And we in Trinidad and Tobago, we are very proud of our banking system, and we will defend it.
That's one other thing, Prime Minister. You did make some sporting references earlier. I'm wondering, did the CARICOM leaders have any conversation about the performance of the West Indies cricket team?
No.
Any sort of assessment?
No.
Even with the new changing?
No. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.